Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to IML's webinar on becoming an intentional learner. My name is Paminda Sandhu. I'm the Corporate Solutions Manager for Queensland and NT, and my role really is supporting organisations to develop their leadership capability. What I want to talk to you about just before we get started today is briefly about the IML competency framework. Now, this is just to give you some context behind which this webinar is based on. The competency framework, which some of you may have already seen, recognises the different layers of leadership. And what we do here at IML is developing those specific competencies using our leadership development programs. Those programs are really unique in the fact that they're all about being practical, all about focusing on those soft skills, and most importantly, how you take them back into the workplace. Now, this webinar is based on content from our Foundations program, which develops the managed self competencies that you can see. And it's going to be facilitated by Tanya Rutherford, who is joining us today from Rockhampton. Just before I introduce Tanya, a few bits of housekeeping. So there's no need to scribble any notes. I will send you a recording of the webinar for you to watch and share with others. You can also request some resources that Tanya is going to mention throughout the webinar, and I'll share the email address with you right at the end. We're going to go for about 35-40 minutes. So Tanya will just see how we go, and then we'll take some questions at the end. So if you do have any, please send them through on the chat. Any that we don't get through, we will endeavour to come back to you. And we'll aim to wrap up about 1:25, 1:30. And again, we'll see how we go for time. I will come back to you at the end just to talk you through some of the other things that we've got upcoming, including other complimentary webinars that you might be interested in. Okay, so now to Tanya. Tanya started her career as an accountant. However, thankfully for us all, discovered a real passion and skill for learning and development, and now has over 20 years of experience in helping individuals, teams and organisations to realise their potential. A little fun fact about Tanya, which I've been stalking her LinkedIn page, is that her favourite song is Take On Me by a-ha, so maybe we'll get a rendition of that if we're lucky in this webinar. So on to you, Tanya. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paminda. I'd forgotten I'd written that there, so I really should be more careful when I'm putting things out in the media if you're going to be stalking me. So thanks for having me, and thanks for joining us today. So we're going to really talk through 5 steps or 5 elements that are really important if you want to become an intentional learner. So by intentional learner, it is making the most of formal learning opportunities, coaching and mentoring, and also the on-the-job learning experiences. So we know that about 70% of our learning happens on the job, and it's really about making sure that we're open to those opportunities. A big thing in becoming an intentional learner is being open to the fact that it is uncomfortable. So I guess a bit of my history and how I came to be working in this space. It was very much when I was in initially year 11 at high school, so it's a little while ago, as I'm sure you can imagine. I went from being a really comfortable, confident learner to being very much outside my comfort zone. I was trying to follow the path that my parents wanted, which was becoming an engineer, which is so not me. But because I'd done well in the past in subjects that were similar, it was sort of seemed like that could actually be an opportunity. What I found was I lost all motivation, all interest in learning. I felt very much not enough, I think is probably the general term to come about. So the maths had gone from being comfortable and familiar to being very foreign and incomprehensible. And because I had a real sense of identity around being clever, about doing well in my grades, I really lost that sense of identity as well, which kind of compounded a lot of the impacts that I was experiencing. And what I tried to do was I just kept doing the things that had worked in the past. So, you know, using the same sort of learning strategies that I thought I had, and, you know, just keeping on working at it and hoping that no one really noticed that I wasn't managing. And it was pretty obvious that I wasn't managing, but, you know, it was a way of trying to navigate that uncertainty. Another thing that I used was I developed a lot of self-talk scripts. Things like, you know, anything more than a pass is a waste of time. Anything that would just get me through. So they weren't really good in terms of giving me the confidence to step outside my comfort zone, but they did keep me safe within that sort of space. It made the uncomfortable a little bit more comfortable, if you like. And this kind of continued on when I went into university. So again, starting university was just writing everything down, didn't know what to do with it, just tried and kept trying. And again, going in the workplace, I was one of those people when I first started working, if I knew what I was doing, I was quite comfortable just doing it. I didn't feel I needed to ask questions. And one of the challenges with that I found was that there is actually, particularly when you're in your early stage of your career, there's that expectation that people judge how you're tracking by the questions you ask. So if you're not asking questions, they don't know how you're going. So it's very hard for them to help you. So there were all these things that were happening that were really holding me back because I didn't really understand these 5 key areas that I'm going to go through now. Obviously, that was a couple of decades ago now. And since then, I've had so much more experience, and I've also seen the experience of others so that I can sort of see how this all fits together and how it holds people back, even in a day-to-day environment, let alone when they're actually doing like a formal qualification. And the key thing about this is it's about making how you can make that learning both intentional and strategic so that it is actually effective when you're doing it. So the 5 areas that I'm going to talk about is really about being brain ready. So thinking about how you can influence your brain's learning ability, how it works, and how you can actually make the most of that. The next one is really developing adaptive strategies. So there's some very basic learning strategies that we can talk about, and there's a whole heap more that we can go into. But for the purpose of today, we're really touching on just a couple of those. The next one is really a sense of whole self resilience. We quite often talk about things in isolation. We talk about goal setting for business. We talk about goal setting for learning. We don't really talk about how we goal set for life, and that includes all those elements. And the problem with that is that when something happens outside that sphere that we're working on, it makes everything else fall apart. The same thing goes with time management and self-care. So we'll be going into that a bit more when we get up to that part. The next one is really something that underlies a lot of this whole learning experience, and that is having a positive learning mindset. I'm sure you can all relate to someone that you've worked with who is so completely closed off to the idea of new things that, you know, conversations start with, we've tried it before, it didn't work. And that could have been 50 years ago, but they're still in the mindset that it didn't work, we're not doing it again, we're not trying anything else. We might be safe where we are, but we're not progressing, and we're really not thriving. And finally, because these days we all work with others, whether it's a teamwork environment in the workplace or whether it's with our customers or our stakeholders, we need to be interacting with each other, and we need to be learning from each other all the time. And when I talk about learning from each other, it's not necessarily like a formal or semi-formal teaching environment. That can be even something as simple as just observing what other people are doing and how they're interacting. Okay, so that's kind of where we're going to go today. And the key thing with this, and it's the same with any other training program that you will do, is that you look to take 1 or 2 things that you can change from today and start implementing them, ideally on a daily basis. If we try and do too many things, it just doesn't work. We need to kind of focus on making one habit change each time, and it's much more effective overall. Okay, so the brain. I think we all recognise that our brain is very much key to how we learn. One of the challenges I think we have is we tend to think of our brain in isolation to everything else. So we don't tend to think of our brain as part of our body, is part of our emotions, and is part of our thinking. So if you have a healthy body, you are more likely to have a healthy, physically functioning brain. And to do that, there's certain things that we need to keep in mind. And I sort of think of there's 4 key things that we need to reflect on and make sure that we're doing in our daily lives to make sure that we have both a healthy body and a healthy brain. The first one's sleep, preferably around that 8-hour mark. It used to be that we would get 9 hours sleep. Most people now would probably average around about 6 hours. And if you're like me and you've had small children, maybe 4.5 hours might be the average. So we have so many things going on in our lives now, but if we can try and focus on making sure that we are getting enough sleep, that's really important. The next one is healthy, nutritious food. Now, we quite often think of healthy food takes time. It doesn't necessarily. In fact, if you're driving down to get takeaway and then driving back, it's probably taking more time and costing more money and not really giving you the benefit. If you've just got healthy snacks around and that's what you've got available, then you're more likely to eat it, and it's just easier that way. The next one's water. I am really bad at drinking water, so I know this is important. I have one here. And water isn't substitutes. It is just water on its own is really important. Yes, we need fluid and we can get it from other forms, but the water itself is just so important. And finally, the 4th one is exercise. And I know we talk a lot more now about whether we're having walking meetings or we've got stand-up desks. Those things all help. Having exercise isn't necessarily a 1-hour gym workout each week or a 5-hour marathon. It's all the little bits that add up. So even if you can take a 5-minute break every half hour or every hour and just do some stretching, you'll find that not only do you feel better, but your brain will actually be much more coherent as well. And then if you do have your walking meetings, you'll find that really compounds it. And the other thing with walking meetings is they're usually, because you are moving and you're not necessarily face-to-face, in fact, that would be difficult to be face-to-face in a walking meeting, you find that people are much more open to ideas, they're thinking more, it's less confrontational. So if you've got the opportunity to do that, and it does depend on the type of meeting, obviously, it is a really good thing and it can really change the way that your team operates. The next one, healthy emotions. If you think back, our industrial age thinking was very much around leaving your emotions at the door, which might work for robots and it might work in production lines, but as people, emotions are such a key part of who we are and what we are. And when we ignore the impact that our emotions have, particularly on our decision making, we're really setting ourselves up for some really fundamental errors. Bad decisions come when we're not taking into account all the elements, our emotions, the facts, and the social and interactive elements as well. And similarly, if you think about it in terms of a lot of our traditional performance management programs were all around managing poor performance. There really wasn't a focus on how we actually work with people, and part of that is that emotional stuff, and get them to working to the level that we want them to, and encouraging them. It's easier to encourage someone and get a better outcome than to be discouraging them. So how do our emotions affect our brain? So for some of you, probably familiar with the impact that our emotional centre in our brain works, so our amygdala and our hippocampus. Very much, we have a response, an emotional response to a person or a situation, and that can be a learning situation, in about 1/32 of a second. So it's extremely fast. And what happens is that the blood leaves our brain and it goes out into our body for our fight, flight, or freeze mode, and we're no longer thinking logically or rationally at all. So just being aware that we have those situations. Sometimes people have a history which actually impacts on their ability to have a positive emotional reaction to a learning situation. That could be the person who is instructing. There may be history there. They may remind them of someone that they have a bad history with, or it could be the experience itself. It's just being aware that there's a lot of different things. And we'll talk a bit later about how we can transition into a more positive learning emotional state. So finally, our thinking mind. So yes, the body, the emotions, they all affect our ability to think, and our negative self-talk or thoughts can also trigger negative emotional and physical states as well. The key thing with negative self-belief is that we are the kings of self-fulfilling prophecies. So if we believe we can't learn, we can't do it, it's too hard, it's not going to happen, we basically shut down our brain and we're no longer open to learning. So being aware if we're finding ourselves in that thinking state, and that can be something as simple as, oh, it's too hard, I just can't get it, I'm stupid. If you find yourself thinking in those ways, or you notice people talking in those ways, that's a real indicator that you need to do some shifting around where your thinking's at. Because everyone can learn, but sometimes we go about it in a different way, and sometimes we need to take a completely different approach to how we're doing it. We're not all the same. I can remember when I did my accounting degree way back in the distant past, and they always taught us about doing debits and credits with T accounts. I cannot get my head around T accounts. It is a real challenge for me, but if I think about it in a different way, I have no problem with it. So it's about finding the things that are going to work for you. The other thing you'll find here, particularly with healthy thinking, is that believing in our teams and letting them know that in a genuine and authentic way is possibly one of the easiest ways to build morale and improve the confidence and self-belief in our team. If our team doesn't think that we believe in them, they may not believe in themselves. So it's one of those easy things that we can do to help shift people into a more positive learning state. So what I want to do before we go on the next slide is I just want you to quickly think of one or two things that you could commit to doing today that could start changing the brain health for yourself or for others around you. And then we're going to talk about learning strategies. So there are so many learning strategies out there, and we could spend hours on each one. But in this case, I thought I'd just bring it back to the basics. So at a very top level, the key things that we want to be doing is we want to be practicing something, we want to be reflecting on it. Are we on the right track? Is it working? And when we do find that it's working, we want to be repeating it. So when you're doing that, what you're essentially doing is you're being very intentional and you're being very mindful about what you're doing. Part of that practice part is going to be around planning. So planning what you want to be learning, how you're going to do it, and taking the action, and then reflecting on what you've learned and also the approach. So that planning part, we tend to think of, okay, well, that might be, I'm planning to learn this from going to this training session. If instead we take that on for each day, so whenever there's something new that we can learn or someone new that we can learn from, then we're looking at, okay, well, how can I make the most of this experience? So that can be a conversation with someone, particularly if it's a targeted conversation, because sometimes learning about what the expectations are is a really important one to start with. Learning about a new process or a new system, or learning about a different way of doing things and trying to encourage people to share what they're doing so that they're all more open to learning from each other. The kinds of reflective questions you might like to think about can be as simple as, what am I doing that is new or different? How is this similar to things that I've done in the past? Am I getting the outcome that I want? And if not, why not? What might I need to look at doing differently? But if I am, how can I do this more often so I'm actually getting that benefit on an ongoing basis? Again, this approach works whether it's the 10% of learning we do in formal training, the 20% we do in coaching and mentoring, or the 70% that we do on the job. It's the same sort of process. It's about whether we're formalising it or not and being intentional. One of the big challenges we probably have in this space and in learning in general and possibly in productivity in general is really around procrastination. So quite often we have to feel motivated enough to start or to continue or finish something. And it's the same with learning. It comes back a lot to resisting change. So with learning, learning is change and change is learning. So it's always going to be a sort of uncomfortable process. Depending on the size of the learning jump that you're doing is going to depend on how uncomfortable it is. So when it is uncomfortable, we're more likely to procrastinate on it. And sometimes procrastination might be that we spend a lot of time in the planning phase, or we spend a lot of time trying to get it perfect, and it's never perfect enough for us to progress on. So there's a lot of different things there. So we do have a lot of resources today that Carmina will be talking about at the end of the workshop. But essentially, we do have one that can actually help with a few prompts if this is an area that you're getting stuck on. Okay, another learning style strategy that is quite popular is the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning styles. There are, or I have seen others, but basically those three are the easiest ones for us to kind of work on and think about, particularly on a day-to-day basis. So essentially we're talking about, do we learn best from seeing, from hearing, or from doing? I think most of us have a particular preference in terms of which one we like to use, and that would be linking quite significantly to our comfort zones. What we'll also find is that using a combination of all of them really gives us the best impact overall. I think one of the, for me at least, the doing element, the kinesthetic, particularly if it's actually physically practicing something, is probably the most challenging. Unless I feel really comfortable that I know what I'm doing, I'm really reluctant to want to try it. Having said that, that's really the best way that we can actually show that we know what we're doing both to ourselves and to others. And it also gives the opportunity for others to see how well we're doing and if they need to change the way that they're approaching things. I think regardless of your comfort zone, I think all of us, if we were being resuscitated by someone, we'd much rather it was someone who had practiced the skills rather than someone who had just read about it in a book. Okay, so the next one, resilience. So resilience is also really big at the moment, and I think because we have a lot of challenges with the mental well-being of our people. And so thinking about all of this as a whole of person approach is really important. Everything continues on when we're at work. We still have family commitments, we still have social commitments, we might have sport, might have study. There's so many different elements of ourselves and not one of them stops existing just because we're at another. So our minds are partly in a lot of those spaces all the time. So when we're looking at our goal setting, it's being really mindful about setting goals that actually connect up both personally and if there's other areas like study as well as with work. So if my personal goals are around spending more time with my family, then my work goals, if the work goals that we're setting are going to be around progressing my career and, you know, traveling a lot, they're going to clash. And so that's going to be a big problem for us, both in the workplace and also for me as a person. And then if I add in study as well, it's going to be really difficult. So we just need to be realistic. We want to be able to blend things so that they both motivate us and drive us without burning us out. When we look at our time, it's also around things like the expectations that we have for ourselves and for others. So sometimes we might have a work time expectation that we need to be there for certain hours. And I can remember talking to a manager of mine about where he thought I could improve, and he was very much, well, I think the only thing is that it would be good if you started work before your first team member and you finished after your last team member. I'm not sure that he realised that my team time frame actually covered about 12 hours. So I would have been working over 12 hours a day just so that it looked like I was there. So we sometimes need to be realistic about that from a work perspective, and then from a learning perspective, we need to think about how we're going to fit that time in. So if we have a lot of work-related deadlines, but we're also trying to embed learning into our schedule, we need to find a way to balance those. And that's all about having agreed expectations and understandings and making sure that everyone's aware of that, not just the manager and the employee, but also the other people that might be having expectations. The other side of that is, and coming back to my experience, is are your expectations around productivity and the outcomes, or is it about the time on the clock? I know a lot of organisations are timesheet driven, particularly when I've worked in government and quasi-government areas, but whether or not that's the best approach in terms of how we manage our outcomes, that's something that, I think still needs to be explored, and the same goes with learning. The other side of it is really thinking about that balance side. If I'm at work and I'm concerned about a sick child and I can't be with my sick child because I have a deadline or because I don't have much sick leave left or whatever it might be, I'm not going to be as productive. So you're paying me to be there, but not necessarily delivering on the outcomes. And if we want flexibility, we kind of need to be able to give flexibility back. So it's about having those conversations to make sure that it fits. Okay, self-care. With self-care, it's one of those interesting ones I know I've been guilty of in the past as well, which is saying to team members who are sick, you're sick, go home. But when I'm sick, I still come to work because I've got stuff to do. And probably infecting everyone else, so I probably shouldn't be telling you that. But it's very much around not just the other person, but also ourselves. We need to give ourselves time and space, whether that's balancing all our commitments or whether that's recovering from something, and also how we support our team in that, because our team learn from what we're doing as well. So if we're not looking after ourselves and we're pushing ourselves, they will see that as that's the norm that they need to do. The same with learning. We need to be building in self-care so that we can actually focus and have our brain space and that physical well-being so that we can be effective learners. And finally, help seeking. So help seeking, it's an interesting one because we quite often, particularly in our education space and certainly our higher education space, is people are uncomfortable asking questions because others react in a negative way when they do. So that might be they're ostracised in some way, it could be that they're dismissed, and not by the person that they're necessarily seeking help with, but that can be from others around. And because, as we'll talk about shortly, we are social creatures, that has a really big impact. So trying to create a space in the workplace where people are comfortable to come and ask for help, whether that is help on something they're doing at work, whether it's help in terms of what else they might need, or can I get some time to actually focus on my studies when I've got all these deadlines? whatever it might be, we do need to be really mindful that we are available and authentically available, so people understand that that's okay and that they feel safe doing it. Another thing we can think about when we're looking at this holistic approach to things, for example, I'm really busy at work, I'm exhausted, I may not be able to change much about my work life, but for example, at home, I might be able to get a cleaner who can come and clean my house once a week, which means that when I go home, I can relax and I can have that downtime, rather than I have to then do housework and look after, I'll still have to look after children, but it just takes the pressure off. So thinking about that holistic approach to everything that we're doing, because that's how we get a better balance or a better blend of everything we're trying to do in life. So with this, before we go on, I just want you to have a quick think about ways that you can gain more help and support so that you have a better sense of balance in your work, learning, personal life. So just one thing that you might like to think about, one thing that you might like to explore that's going to help you get a better sense of balance. And we will be taking questions at the end, by the way. Okay, so mindset. It is all in our head, strangely enough. That's what mindset is. Mindset, in this sense, is really about having a growth mindset or having a fixed mindset. So a growth mindset is very much believing that we can learn, believing that we can change, believing that if we fail at something, that it's a learning opportunity. We don't really fail. It's more about an opportunity to try something else. So if we're thinking in a design setting, it's really about that iterative process. We try something, doesn't work, we try something else. If we've got that mindset about ourselves in the workplace, in our learning, we're a lot more open to trying and learning new things. How we react to challenges, again, is very much, are we open to the idea that a challenge is a good thing? And that probably depends on the day as well as to how you're feeling, but definitely if we're open to the idea of a challenge as being a learning opportunity, it's a lot easier. So the opposite of a growth mindset is a fixed mindset. So that is believing that what we know is fixed. We can't, not necessarily we can't learn new things, but that we will never be any smarter than we are now. That if we don't know something in a certain area, we're never going to actually understand that area. And I have to say, I'm guilty of this at times, is I will say things like, oh, my brain doesn't work that way. And that's because it's more difficult for me to learn in a particular area. It may not be one of my strengths or something that I can naturally move into, but it doesn't mean I'll never be able to learn it. But it is a way of kind of discounting that and creating a safer space. I'm giving you all my tricks now, so you'll know all through me. A really good one to look up on if you want to learn a bit more about growth and fixed mindsets and how they actually influence people learning. We have a good video from Carol Twerk, who is basically seen as the person who's behind the framing of growth and fixed mindsets. Although the video is about mindsets in school children, I think that most of us can see correlations to the people that we work with, people we've worked with in the past, and how adults as well as children actually react and behave in a growth or fixed mindset. So it is worth a watch, and Parminder will have that resource available for you as well. So essentially, coming back to a growth mindset, it's framing around that our effort and our attitude determine success, whether that's success in the workplace, whether that's success in a learning environment. Everything else is just an opportunity to develop the skills that we need to get there. If we have a gut reaction to something, which is like, oh, that wasn't so good, but we can work out how we can do it better, then we're moving in that growth mindset. And they're kind of listening to the type of self-talk and also the way that you physically feel when you have challenges gives you an idea of the kind of mindset that you're working in at the time. The good news or bad news, depending on your perspective, is that we move in and out of growth and fixed mindsets all the time. Sometimes we have particular topics, like I mentioned, where I might feel I have more of a growth mindset in some areas and more of a fixed mindset in others. But sometimes also the situation and what's going on around us can help us move in and out of those stages. The key is we want to try and make the growth mindset a more comfortable place for us to be in so that we'll be in there more often. Genuinely encouraging the effort that other people make and recognising the effort that we make ourselves is probably one of the big ways of doing that. So if you think about, I don't know how many of you have got children, but if you think about with children, we tend to have grown up with people complimenting the outcome. So saying, oh, you're so clever, you got that right. Instead, if we're talking about, I really appreciate how much effort you've put into this, I can see that you've been trying really hard and we're actually getting those outcomes now. You've learnt so much from growing through this process, and where we are at the moment is a much further place than we've been in the past. Anything that is around that process of growing and learning is going to be encouraging people to try harder. When we have shut down comments like, well, that was really dumb, or that's wrong, go fix it, those kind of statements close things up. And it's hard because for a lot of us, we're brought up that way, but it's definitely the more aware you are of it, the easier it becomes. You can be much more proactive about how am I going to frame this statement so that people actually grow from it rather than shut down. Same with ourselves. When we're looking at our self-talk, instead of saying something like, I just can't get this, we start talking around, I haven't got it yet. I might take a break for a minute and then I'll come back and I'll have another look at it and see if there's another way I can approach it. And sometimes having little reminders like that, particularly if you find you're getting stuck in that mindset a lot, it might be on your computer, it could be on your mirror at home. Up the top of my mirror at home, I have I am enough. It looks that way when you're looking at the screen. And that's very much, I don't always see it, but every now and then it kind of catches my eye, and it's just that reassurance of, yeah, I can do this. I can achieve what I want to achieve because I am enough. I have the skills, I have the knowledge, and if I don't have it right now, I can get it. So little things like that can really make a big difference over time, and it's really easy to scoff and kind of go, oh yeah, that sounds really silly or whatever, but it can make a big difference. Let's see if there's anything else. I've got some notes here on uncheck. Oh, the other thing is also about being realistic about what people can do. So if, for example, Mary's really experienced at doing XYZ, what we can expect her to do and her to achieve is different from Joe over here, who isn't as experienced. So we need to be realistic. It's not just a one-size-fits-all. It's not you've got the same job description, you should be able to do the same thing. It's not that you're all doing the same course or the same training program, that you should all be able to come back exactly the same. We're all different. It's all contextual. So being mindful of that and then changing or choosing the way that we talk and think as a result can really help build those growth mindsets for ourselves as well as for others. Okay, social learning. So this is, we are social creatures. We hear a lot more about finding your tribe, or at least I seem to keep hearing about finding your tribe. We learn from each other and we learn from how we feel as well, which is sort of an interaction with other people. Whether it's intentional, whether it's subconscious, by watching people act and react, it all teaches us what to do, how to behave, how to be part of that tribe. Coming back to when we were little babies, learning how to walk, learning how to talk, learning how to fit into our family so that we were safe and welcomed was all part of that learning experience. Now, I know not everyone has that ability, and there's certainly for some people that is quite challenging. Being mindful of that as well is really important. So knowing that some people don't pick up on the little nuances and the body language and the tone that we might pick up on. And being aware that that's not a defining thing for how they are, but it's really just a bit of a missing link, I guess, for them in terms of their communication skills. And now I've lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. So we've talked a bit about how we need to be in a positive and emotional mindset. Being in a positive and encouraging team or workplace is also really important, both from a formal learning perspective and from a working learning perspective. Quite often what can happen is people go away for a training program, they come back, they might have lots of good ideas about what they can do. And what they find is that people aren't open to change what they're doing. It could be that we're very much structured around systems. It could be that people feel intimidated by a change, they're uncomfortable, and so they tend to shut down the change. So when we have people who are going away and we're investing in their training, if we're not also investing in the healthy learning culture in the team, it's going to be very difficult for them when they come back. And sometimes that can be more demoralizing than not sending them on a course at all. So thinking about that bigger picture. So for ourselves, when we're coming back from a training experience or we've been learning a new process, thinking about what do I need to keep in mind so that I can feel safe and also share or also continue my learning journey in this space. Because it can be quite difficult, particularly if we're feeling judged, particularly if we feel excluded as a result. They've actually done studies with the brain that actually show that when people are excluded from a group, the same part of the brain lights up as if they're experiencing physical pain. It's very much one of those survival things that we've developed as part of our evolution. So we can't change that, but we need to be able to understand it and work with it. Okay, so I guess with this, before we move on to the next one, what I'd like you to do is think about what you might like to change about how you act and how you react so that you can improve the learning experiences within your team and for yourself. So something that you could do to change the way you act, the way you react, and improve the learning experiences. And that is just about it, and I'm not sure how we're going for time. Well, not too bad, that's good. Okay, so that's all from me for today. It is important to remember that when we're talking about small changes, everything we do has a ripple effect. So we choose one or two things and we work on them over a period of time on a daily basis. If you can block things into your calendar, that's a really good reminder, particularly if you've got it around the same time each day. It's all about that practice, reflection and repetition. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Although I haven't been able to see your face, you might need to restart your camera. But otherwise, thank you so much, and apologies for anyone who that has cut off. There she is. Thank you so much for that. I found that fascinating, and I hope all of our webinar attendees did too. I'm a serial procrastinator, or I was. But like Carol Dweck's, so I just love that. And she did a TED talk, I think, and she talked all about the marshmallow test, which if anyone's not familiar with that, definitely give that one a Google. We'll try and include it in our resources list, because that really opened my mind into how we've got that kind of that delayed gratification and what a big impact that has in how you learn. Yeah, and it sounds kind of fun as well, marshmallow test. Okay, so we'll just move on to a few questions. We're going good for time so far. So actually, I might put my question first, if that's okay. I have a question. So you talked early on in the webinar about that negative self-talk and not believing in yourself, which I kind of relate to that whole imposter syndrome that I think a lot of people go through, where you're really underestimating your abilities. And then on the other end of the scale, where you have the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you overestimate your ability. How do we actually maintain a balance of who we are in a workplace or in an environment, or how we actually learn how well we're doing? What would you recommend to get a good picture of how you are, performing?
Well, I think that's when you do actually seek that 360 feedback kind of experience. And I know IML has formal tools for that, but even if it's just starting to ask those questions and feeling comfortable about having the conversations with people. So one of the things I found with the formal programs is if you're not talking to those people normally, it's really difficult for them to then open up and share the challenges that they think you might have. So having that, building up that relationship beforehand, I think is really good. And sometimes just saying, like I know one I had with one of my managers was just like, I just started the job and it was like, okay, well, what I'd really appreciate from you is regular feedback. Just let me know if I'm off track, if there's things that are working, not working. And that worked so well. So I was actually really lucky with that boss. He was great.
Okay, no, that's really helpful, actually. I think it's always a bit scary asking people for feedback. You don't know quite what they're going to say. And then I guess you're also accountable for doing something about it, but that's the most important part. Okay, right. Next question. Thank you so much for that. It's really helpful. So this is from a manager here asking, how do you approach an employee to become an intentional learner if they lack the self-awareness and the motivation themselves?
And those ones are really hard to talk generally about because they are so specific to the person. I guess initially it's really about understanding the person themselves, what their own motivators are, what their interests are, and then looking at how can we align that. When I've done coaching with an accounting firm before, we had one of the team members, he hated doing timesheets. He would never do them. And, that's billable time, so that's really important. His driver was around the benefit for his customer, for the people that he was serving. So when we started having a conversation, and I framed it in terms of if your customers are being quoted the right amount each year because they know how much work it actually takes, that's going to make it easier for them because they'll understand what's actually involved and they're making the right decisions to get there, rather than things being delayed and then there's this big bill at the end and it's not a good experience for them. Once he saw that connection, that was it. That was for him, that really just flicked the switch for him. He was totally on top of his timesheets all the time then. Amazingly, like I didn't think it would be that extreme, but that was his real motivator. So once we ticked that box for him, he was fine. It was, yep, okay, I get it now. I get the importance in terms of my customer. I am okay with doing this. And I think that's the same with a lot of them. And one of the things that maybe you could share as well, Parminder, is David Rock's SCARF framework. So a lot of people have things are framed around either their status, their certainty, their autonomy, how they're relating to others, or whether it's fair. So for a lot of staff who've been in a role for a long period of time, in a team that hasn't changed a lot, they might be very much resistant to learning new things because they think they know it already. And there's that uncertainty, there's that sort of, they want to be certain in what they're doing. They don't want to step out of that certainty. They think that they might have perhaps status around, I've been here the longest, I'm the expert. Asking them to learn something new suggests that they're no longer the expert, moves them into a state of uncertainty. So they're going to be resisting it, trying to work out how for that person you can create a more comfortable experience for them. So creating it as more certain, framing it around how that's going to improve their status, whatever it might be. It isn't easy, I recognise that. I've certainly worked with people where it's very much, well, we know it, we don't need to change.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
you're almost coming back to the, but that's what it was 5-10 years ago, and we've moved on, and you're behind now. We need to get you up to speed. That's a really difficult conversation to have. And I'm not an expert in that field. I just want to let you know, I'm not an expert, but this is the kind of challenges that you're working with, so you can start looking at how you frame those conversations.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and we do actually utilise the SCARF model a lot, and I personally found it quite powerful just to understand my own motivations and then recognise my triggers going in anything, you know, work-wise or personally, and it's really nice because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It actually encourages people to get to know each other a lot better, which I think is, you know, better for everybody. Thank you very much for that answer. That's really, it gives us a lot, and we will include that in the resources. I think we've got time for one question, and Tanya, you're obviously very shy today because your camera's gone off again. So I'm really sorry about that. Might just need to pop that back on again. If not, we will carry on. Great, we're back. Okay, this question I actually think is really important. Just going back to what you were talking about, resilience. So how do you know, what sort of steps could someone take if they were struggling with a work-life balance and actually having that conversation with their workplace?
I think that it is challenging. There are generally things that you notice when someone is not managing well. So generally you will see changes in behaviour. They might be quieter. They might, you know, so less engaging in conversations. They might, and depending on the person, so, you know, if it's someone like me and I've become really quiet and I'm very serious all the time, then you kind of know that there's something up. Whereas for other people, that might be more their normal state. So you need to know the person to really be able to pick it up on the outside. And if you don't, there might be other people in the team. If you've got a good rapport within your team of saying, look, you know, if you notice that something's up, come and have a chat to me. Let me know if you notice that someone's not managing with things. The other part of it really is having those regular conversations with people. You know, actually saying, you know, once a week we're going to have, you know, a 10-minute coffee catch up. Where are we at? What are we struggling with? How can we help? Whatever it might be, so that people start getting in the habit of feeling comfortable about talking about things. And of course, being vulnerable yourself. So being able to say, look, I'm really struggling at the moment because, you know, I've had 4 hours sleep and, you know, my car got stolen last week and I'm still struggling with that, whatever it might be. If the more that you're prepared to share in a respectful way, the more people are going to feel comfortable about sharing back. So if you never let people know that there's a problem and you're the person who's the corporate superstar, no one is going to feel comfortable sharing their vulnerabilities with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you, on the other hand, say if you are the individual and your employer is the one that seems reluctant to talk to you about it, how do you know, what sort of power do you have to initiate that?
It is challenging because if you don't feel comfortable having the conversation, it's very hard to have the conversation. Usually these days, most organisations have like an employee assistance program that's available, or there might be a friend that you have in the workplace that might be able to help act as an advocate for you, particularly if what you need is a bit of time out, just to kind of regroup, get things organised. But definitely if you can have a conversation with your manager, it's really important that you can. But the employee assistance programs are really great. I don't know of any that are not confidential, so it at least gives you someone that you can have a conversation with who can give you some ideas.
Absolutely, it gives you that outlet. Great, thank you so much for that. Some really great questions, and we do have a few more which we'll endeavour to get back to later today by email. So I think that draws us quite nicely to the end of the webinar. I just want to quickly wrap up by reminding you of what we've still got coming up. And also to give you that all-important email address. So it's programs@managersandleaders.com.au for any of the resources that Tanya mentioned and the couple that I threw in just at the end there. So we'll make sure that those get out to you. Just make sure you send that email requesting them. We also do have another upcoming webinar. So I mentioned this is part of a series that we're doing complimentary for all our members. So the next one's going to be on the 15th of October. Which is on getting the best out of your people by Gina Brooks, which I think is going to be a really valuable one and lots of practical tips there. As I said, they're complimentary for members, and if you've missed any of the previous ones, you can find them on our website. And we are actually enrolling now for our foundations program for February and May next year, which is fantastic. So obviously spaces are limited. We only have 16 people as a maximum in each cohort, which is why the 70-20-10 sort of learning thing that we were talking about earlier, that's why it works so effectively in this program. So do get in touch with any of us here at IML if you are interested. And thank you again, Tanya, for your time and for your expertise. And I hope for all our attendees you found that useful. And I look forward to seeing you at a future IML webinar, masterclass or program. Thanks. Have a good day.
Thank you.